she destroyed the Beatles. At least that's what fans of the band like to believe. So who is she, this Yoko Ono? First and foremost, she's an artist and activist. She's also a musician and songwriter. John Lennon's famously scandalous widow and mother of his second son Sean. And finally, she's a vivacious Japanese grandmother with a rich past. We'll talk about him now. Yoko Ono was born in 1933 to a wealthy banker. 2 weeks before Yoko was born, her father was transferred to San Francisco. Yoko Ono saw her father for the first time at the age of 2, when the family moved to America to live with him. But already in 1937 the whole family returns back to Japan. Their little Yoko is assigned to Tokyo's elite school Gakushuin, one of the most prestigious schools in Japan, where she studied until 1940, when the family left Tokyo for New York for a year. Upon returning, Yoko was waiting for another school, Kimai Gakuen, also exclusive and successful. During the school period, the girl attended piano lessons. During the war, the family remained in Tokyo and was sheltered in a special bunker in Tokyo's Azabu neighborhood. All except the father, was in the war. But this did not save them from destruction and starvation. The Ono family transported their belongings in a wheelbarrow and had to beg for food. From such a drastic change, Yoko's psyche broke a little. According to Yoko herself, it was during this period that she developed an aggressive attitude to life and an understanding of her outsider status. They traveled the countryside, trading former comfort items for rice. After the war, the family returned to the United States, but without Yoko. She stayed to study at Gakusuin, which had survived due to its proximity to the emperor's palace. She was a classmate of Prince Akihito, the future emperor of Japan. After school, Yoko entered the Faculty of Philosophy at Gakushuin University, where she studied for 2 semesters and safely expelled. In 1952 Yoko Ono joined her family in New York and enrolled in the closest to home Sarah Lawrence College. Her parents approved of the place of study, but they were strongly dissatisfied with their daughter's lifestyle and her surroundings. And next, in 1956, Yoko Ono dropped out of school to elope with Japanese composer Toshi Ishiyanagi, a star of Tokyo's experimental community. The couple married. After dropping out of her studies, Yoko went to work. She was a secretary and also taught traditional Japanese art for the Japan Society. At the same time, she began to create. She worked with Fluxus, an association of free avant-garde artists. After an exhibition in 1961, where her work was exhibited, the association invited her to join officially. But Yoko wished to remain an independent artist. Nevertheless, she continued her active cooperation with Fluxus. In 1961 she performed at a concert of radical experimental music and performance. There she fit in perfectly. But in 1962, after several years apart, Yoko and Toshi finally separated. Ono returns home to live with her parents as she suffers from clinical depression. After looking at all this, the parents made a hard decision and put their daughter in a mental institution. And who knows what would have happened next if it wasn't for Anthony Cox. Cox was so much admired by Yoko Ono's work that he got her out of the hospital and married her in 1962. The marriage was annulled on the 1st of March 1963 because Yoko Ono forgot to officially dissolve her previous marriage to Toshi. It was awkward, she got caught up in the moment and forgot. Nevertheless, Ono and Cox soon had a daughter, Kyoko Cox. The duties of raising a daughter fell on the shoulders of Anthony. Yoko, on the other hand, preferred to pursue art and build up interesting connections. Anyway, there were plenty of things to do, not a child. For example, to lie beautifully on the piano during the performance of John Cage. Cox tolerated for a long time, but in 1969 the couple divorced and Anthony took their daughter. And in the same year, Yoko Ono married John Lennon and tried to fight for her daughter. But since little Kyoko had already been her father's caretaker, in 1971 Anthony Cox won custody of the child, using as his final argument the accusation that Yoko was unfit to be a mother because of her drug use. After finally winning, he renames his daughter in the American way. Kyoko-chan Ono Cox becomes Ruth Holman Cox and takes her away from the bohemian life in the Christian organization Fellowship of the Living Word. Ono and Lenon try for several years to track down Kyoko, but without success. Yoko Ono met Lennon in 1966. The meeting took place at a concept exhibition at the Indica Gallery in London. The exhibition was not yet open and Ono was still preparing the exhibits. Her concept with a ladder and a magnifying glass with which you had to climb to the ceiling to see pleased John, as the rest of the exhibit was mostly dreary and angry. After his favorable review, Lennon was presented with another Ono piece, a blank slate with an invitation to hammer in a nail. John wanted to hammer the first one, but Yoko Ono wouldn't let him, as the exhibition was still closed. The owner of the exhibition exclaimed in amazement, "Don't you know who that is? He's a millionaire, he can buy the whole exhibition." But Yoko pretended she didn't know who the Beatles were and allowed a nail to be hammered in on the condition that Lennon would pay her 5 bob for it. John joked back, offering to pay 5 imaginary shillings for a chance to hammer an imaginary nail. And so it was settled. And, also on his way out he took a bite out of an apple displayed in her work apple, leaving the artist furious. And if John just liked everything, Yoko fell in love. It was a blow, it was fate. And Yoko Ono is not the kind of person who is used to letting fate out of her hands. At first she just overwhelmed John with her conceptual work. Then the correspondence began. Correspondence was followed by calls, lots of calls. Ono didn't hesitate to call Lennon at home. The presence of a wife and child didn't embarrass her. She was going after John, willing to go to bat for him. And he didn't mind. Beginning to suspect something, Cynthia Lennon demanded from her husband an explanation, but he only said that the artist is just demanding money for her nonsense. When Cynthia and her son went to Greece for a while, John took the opportunity to invite Yoko to his place. For creativity, of course. However, creativity turned into banal sex and morning tea and dressing gowns on the naked body. That's how Mrs. Lennon caught them. There should have been a mute scene, but Ono just smiled and greeted Cynthia as if nothing had happened. Cynthia immediately demanded a divorce. Lennon tried to stop her, to save the family, swore his love, but his betrayal was not forgiven. In the process of divorce, John tried to take away her right to custody of her son. Fortunately for everyone, the court left the child with his mother. Having got John, Yoko Ono was determined to make her position known to everyone. Starting with the Beatles. She went into the studio, ignoring all the arrangements. She interfered with the recording process. And even more, Yoko Ono herself became part of the new album, recording vocals for 3 songs. After the marriage, the couple began active social advocacy for peace. For the sake of his new wife, John even changed his middle name from Winston to Ono, becoming her full property. She would remind his relatives of this rather rudely after Lennon's death. But the podcast isn't about him, it's about her. The couple get banned from America and settle in the southeast of England. At the same time Ono gets into a car accident and is injured. For her sake John buys a king-size bed and places it in the studio where the Beatles' last album Abbey Road was written. Some would say what a romance, but I would point out that John's leash was short and there is nothing surprising in the fact that the album was the last one. The band broke up, but the show must go on. Yoko Ono and John Lennon formed their own band, the Plastic Ono Band. Yoko Ono's personal album consisted of raw, harsh vocals. The next album consisted of experimental rock compositions. Not so scary anymore, but still impressive. In 1970, after being granted entry, the couple left England for good and settled in Manhattan. In 1975, Yoko and John had a son, Sean. His father temporarily interrupted his career to take care of his son. Yoko continued her solo career. In early 1980, Lennon actively returned to creative life. Together with Yoko, they began working on new compositions. On the 8th of December, as they were returning from the studio to their home in Manhattan, John was shot and killed by a fan. Ono funded memorials to Lennon, painted covers in his honor and reminded the world that he, her Lennon, had passed away. And her entire career was based on the cult of John Lennon and the Beatles. From 1990 to 1994, Ono re-released her old albums and the best moments from them with new sound. She then produced her own off-Broadway musical with Broadway versions of her New York rock songs. Next, she increasingly began performing with her son Sean and putting together concerts in John's honor. In 2014, Two of Yoko Ono's works were unveiled to the world at once, Earth Peace and Sky Ladder. Following these two, the Palazzo exhibited the Feminist Rising in 2015. In 2016, Ono presented her now permanent exhibition in Chicago, Skylanding. Her most recent street work so far is Refugee Boat 2019. In January 2021, Ono co-founded the Coda Collection project. That's about it. But Yoko is alive and will surely release a couple more artistic concepts that will surprise us.